Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. No breakthrough on the first day of U.S.-mediated peace talks in Geneva between Ukraine and Russia as Moscow conducts a major attack on Ukraine the night before. We'll have more from our Ukraine correspondent Katerji joining us in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. Polish man faces life in prison accused of spying for Russia. Spain cracks down on big tech's use of AI to generate explicit images of children. And exports of agri-food products from Poland reach record highs in 2025. Day one of the trilateral Geneva talks on Ukraine has come to a close, yielding few results. This as pressure mounts on Ukraine to hold elections before the U.S. established deadline, while Russia intensifies territorial concessions over Donetsk. Kazimierz Łysiak sheds light on the direction the meeting is taking.
Diplomatic vehicles filled the streets of Geneva this week as the United States is holding talks with Iran on avoiding a conflict and with Ukraine and Russia to end theirs. This intercontinental in the Swiss capital is where the discussions are taking place. According to the Kremlin, there won't be any news on potential progress until Wednesday.
I don't think we should expect any news today, because, as you know, the talks are scheduled to continue tomorrow. There are no plans to make any statements. Of course, everything will be held behind closed doors.
It is yet another round of talks between the three sides, and it takes place just days before the 4th anniversary of the full-scale invasion. Previous negotiations failed to produce anything substantial other than prisoner exchanges. The biggest bone of contention remains territorial concessions. Russia wants Ukraine to give up the entirety of Donbas, a crucial defense line for Kyiv.
We do know that those are the belt of fortresses and so-called immune system of our security. If we give up that piece of territory, that fortresses, we wouldn't be able to protect the whole left bank of Ukraine sooner or later.
President Volodymyr Zelensky claims the United States wants Ukraine to agree to ceding land before signing any security agreements, and Zelensky wants it the other way around.
They said first this swap of territories or something like that, and then security guarantees. I think first security guarantees. Second, we will not give up our territories because we are ready for compromise. What kind of compromise are we ready for? Not for the compromise that gives Russia the opportunity to recover quickly and come again and occupy us.
These comments came after Zelensky met with U.S. State Secretary Marco Rubio on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference. America's top diplomat insists Washington's primary goal is achieving peace.
We're not seeking to impose a deal on anybody. We're not trying to force anyone to take a deal they don't want to take. We just want to help them because we think it's a war that's incredibly damaging.
But Kyiv and its European allies have a different objective, achieving peace on fair conditions without leaving Ukraine vulnerable to a future attack.
This is the red line for Europe, because if Ukraine fails and gives up, not only Russia preserves its million army, with now a question where to send it. Is it Baltics, is it Poland, or any other places?
Still, both Kyiv and its European partners want to see the end of hostilities as soon as possible. The only side refusing an immediate ceasefire remains the aggressor, Russia. And that is leaving Ukrainians with little hope for these negotiations.
One shouldn't trust the Russians, not even a little. I really want to believe that something will change after the meeting, but I don't really count on it.
And no wonder. It's hard to believe Russia's intentions when it's all smiles and exclusive hotels, but all bombs and drones in the country they've been invading for the past 4 years. For TVP World, Kazimierz Łysiak.
As the negotiations in Geneva continue, Russia carried out further attacks on Ukraine. Overnight, Moscow unleashed a swath of missiles, leaving at least 1 person dead and 25 injured. For more, let's go live to our Kyiv correspondent Katerji. Good evening, Oz. So Andriy Sybiha said Russia keeps its eyes on its main targets, namely energy and civilian infrastructure. Tell us, what do you know about this major missile attack and sustained losses?
Yeah, this has happened again while these talks are ongoing. As you said, 1 person killed, 25 others injured. That's to say, that was this morning following overnight attacks. More people have died throughout the day. 3 energy workers killed in Donetsk in Russian attacks. Once again, targeting not just the energy infrastructure itself, but also the workers struggling to keep the power on across Ukraine. Energy infrastructure once again targeted in the southern port city of Odessa, with the DTEK, the company, the state energy company, calling the attack incredibly serious, causing a huge amount of damage to DTEK's energy facilities in the southern port city of Odessa. Zelensky reporting in the morning that many people were without power and water and heating. So again, this is causing real risk to life because the temperatures are still well below freezing here in Ukraine. So while all eyes are on these negotiations in Switzerland, Russia keeps targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, causing immense suffering for the people of Ukraine.
According to the latest reports, Ukrainian armed forces are gaining ground. This is clearly not something that happened overnight. So what do we know? Could the ban on Starlink for Russia have something to do with things taking such a turn?
So there have been some interesting developments at the start of 2026 on the front lines. One of those things are, as you said, the ban on Starlink for Russian troops. Now, this ban was already in force, but Russians were finding a way around that ban to stay connected by, getting them from other countries and registering them there. Starlink has enacted certain policies that have restricted their usage even further. This whitelist in Ukraine, so you have to be whitelisted to be used on the territory of Ukraine. That has seemed to cut off large parts of the Russian front line from their day-to-day communications that they were able to get using Starlink. Now, there have been some movements on the front line in both directions. However, there have been reporting that there have been large gains on the front line on the Ukrainian side as a result of this. Now, Ukrainian forces have recaptured some territory, but one of the things that we are also seeing is that the Russians, over the course of the last few months, going back to the start of the war, really, but they have over-exaggerated their gains on the front lines and said that they are occupying positions that they are not. So what we are seeing, less than there are large-scale Russian offensives, even though there are some small ones taking place, what we are seeing is the maps being redrawn to more accurately reflect the picture, which Russia has been exaggerating its gains. So what might look like a large gain on a map is actually very little territory has moved in either direction. So we're just seeing the maps getting more in line with reality from what Russia managed to capture.
Thank you so much, Oz. This was Oz Katerji reporting live from Kyiv. Life in prison. This could be the new normal for a Polish man who stands accused of espionage on behalf of Russia. Sites under his surveillance ranged from military factories to NATO centers. Another example of a mounting security problem across the continent. Defense correspondent Zuzanna Jurek reports.
An espionage indictment in response to an act of treason.
29-year-old Viktor Zet is a Pole who betrayed his country. He expressed readiness to collect and then pass on information to Russian intelligence. He went on to gather intelligence which primarily concerned the security of facilities of strategic importance to the state.
The suspected Russian operative detained by the Polish Internal Security Agency is said to have been operating near Bydgoszcz in north-central Poland. The 29-year-old is said to have targeted vital military facilities, including the nitrochem chemical plant, the military aviation works factory, the Bydgoszcz airport, and crucially, the NATO Joint Force Training Center. Crucial hub for training and interoperability within the NATO alliance. It comes just 2 weeks after a long-term civil servant in the Polish Ministry of Defense was arrested on charges of spying for the Kremlin. But as underlined by the Minister of the Interior, this is neither an isolated incident nor one endemic to Poland.
This is organized crime. This is crime that knows no geographical borders, no national borders.
Across Europe, from the former Soviet states of Moldova and Estonia to Germany, people are being enlisted to support the work of the Russian security services. According to experts, Germany might be a hotspot for Russian espionage in the EU due to the historical ties between the two countries.
It was a human factor, and thousands of Russians due to roots, German roots, wandered to Germany and became citizens of Germany. And among them was recruited agents of Russian services.
At the beginning of February, German police detained 5 men with Russian roots on charges of smuggling goods worth at least 30 million euros to some 20 Russian defense companies violating EU sanctions. And the true scale of the operations remains unknown.
We don't know how many they got, but we know that they got access to various crises of our society.
If convicted of espionage, the 29-year-old arrested in Poland faces a prison sentence of no less than 8 years, or even a life in prison. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Now time for Serbia. The country is experiencing another major wave of civil unrest after a tram accident claimed the life of a student, sparking anger and calls for the government to yet again take accountability. The European Union warns of financial repercussions if the government fails to provide an adequate response. Our Balkans correspondent Paweł Trzaskowski reports.
Thousands took to the streets of Sarajevo on Monday following a fatal tram accident last week that left a 23-year-old student dead. Protesters demand that authorities be held accountable for the incident.
I am asking all the young people to go to the protests because we are the ones who will make the change, and without us this would not be possible.
In the crowd, the symbol of a red hand can be spotted, a nod to continuous anti-corruption protests in neighboring Serbia. This red hand symbolizes the authorities' responsibility for the disaster in Novi Sad. In November 2024, the concrete canopy of the city's newly renovated railway station collapsed, tragically killing 16 people. This became a catalyst for dissatisfaction with the rule of the country's president Aleksandar Vučić and the Serbian Progressive Party. And the last few days saw an uptick in intensity of the protests, with demonstrations held in various cities on 3 consecutive days.
I'm glad to see people here in such numbers and that we haven't settled down. There was a period of no reaction, but I like that I still see the same people I saw on the streets in the summer.
But Monday's protests bore another resemblance to the ones that were staged in the summer. After a calmer couple of months, tensions were rising again. At least 3 protesters are reported injured after being attacked by men opposing the anti-government protests. As a result, more demonstrations were scheduled for Tuesday.
We are in a situation of political attrition, waiting for the elections to come.
And these elections, one of the protesters' demands, are expected to eventually come by the end of this year, a result of domestic pressure. But Vučić was recently hit on a second front as well, with criticism coming from the European Union. The bloc says up to 1.6 billion euros in loans and grants for Belgrade could be withheld as a consequence of the recent changes to the judiciary. In January, Serbia's parliament passed a highly controversial set of amendments that effectively centralizes the judicial branch. Vučić keeps saying Belgrade is still serious about its EU aspirations.
It was the case, and it'll be till the end of my mandate, till the end of my tenure, Serbia will be on its EU path.
But the EU says the new amendments are eroding trust. And a new wave of opposition is swelling, with representatives of the Serbian judiciary announcing their own protest to be staged this Saturday. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Spain joins regulators worldwide in cracking down on social media platforms such as X, TikTok and Meta. The move follows alleged distribution of harmful and illegal AI-generated content involving children, with Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez introducing new regulations. Aisha Badje has more on the intensifying scrutiny of big tech.
Today, our children are exposed to a space they were never meant to navigate alone.
The battle over artificial intelligence is intensifying across Europe, with Spain launching the latest probe against big tech.
X, Meta, and TikTok may be committing through the creation and dissemination of child pornography generated by their AI systems. These platforms are attacking the mental health, dignity, and rights of our sons and daughters. The state cannot allow it. The impunity of the giants must end.
The move places Spain at the forefront of a broader European push to curb harmful uses of generative AI, with Elon Musk's Grok increasingly treated as a political persona non grata.
We went into battle on that because I thought this is not good enough. We went into battle, we made the necessary steps, we threatened action, and we won that battle in relation to Grok, but we've got to do it with all AI bots, and we will do it.
Ireland's Data Protection Agency is also pursuing Grok, and in France, police recently raided the offices of the social media platform X as part of a year-long investigation into suspected algorithm abuse. Now, deepfakes aren't exactly a new phenomenon, but they are getting better and better, and governments need to act fast, even unilaterally.
I do remember the case of the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, who was actually deepfaked into a pornographic movie. And she did not wait for, European regulations. She instead introduced a very severe regulation in Italy tackling deepfaking other people, particularly with the purpose of putting them or embedding them into a pornographic type of content.
But this is not only a question of deepfakes. What irks governments all around the world is the scale of harm affecting children.
In 11 days, there have been 3 million AI-generated nude photos, many of them of minors.
And the debate is no longer just European. In the United States, a landmark lawsuit filed in California accuses Meta and YouTube of deliberately designing products they knew would addict children. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg is set to testify.
With all these children that have been lost to social media harms, and it's just wrong. And this is a global problem. It's not just here in the US, it's UK, it's France, it's Germany. This is a global problem and things need to change.
Regulatory philosophies may differ, but governments on both sides of the Atlantic are making clear that child protection, transparency, and corporate responsibility are becoming central battlegrounds in the digital age. For TVP World, I'm Aisha Badja.
Polish exports of agricultural goods and food are soaring, amounting to almost 60 billion euros last year, with the European Union serving as the country's largest customer. How long can Poland keep up this momentum? Maciej Wilowski has more in his latest report.
From butter to beef and fresh vegetables, Polish food is making its way to grocery shelves around the world in record quantities. The value of Polish agricultural and food exports hit an all-time high of 58.4 billion euros last year, an 8.6% increase compared to 2024, data from the National Support Center for Agriculture showed.
Polish food and food processing industry is really strong, and is strong because of the quality, of the food. The companies in these sectors are really very well managed.
The European Union is by far the biggest customer, with 75% of Polish food exports destined for EU member states like Germany and France. But a new trade deal between the EU and Mercosur, a bloc of South American countries which includes Brazil and Argentina, could crowd out some of Poland's exports to its EU partners.
The other side, the South American countries, they very much count on exports of the food products.
Under the deal, tariffs on roughly 90% of imports from Mercosur countries, including food products, are to be eliminated, with opponents fearing it could undermine domestic producers. And Polish farmers have been especially vocal in their opposition.
We cannot compete with them because they produce at a much cheaper cost, and they spray chemicals that have long been banned in Poland.
But on the other hand, the agreement with Mercosur could open up a new market for Poland's high-quality food products, one of several untapped markets for the country's exporters.
The exports of the Polish food products have great potential in Asia, have great potential, in Middle East, and also I can see the chance for placing Polish products under the agreement of Mercosur in South American countries.
With the quality and competitiveness of its products, Poland's agricultural sector has the means to capitalize on trade with Mercosur, spreading out increasingly beyond Europe. For TVP World, I'm Maciej Wilowski.
Day one of the Geneva talks is over without major breakthroughs. Revisiting the subject and more, joining me here on World News Tonight for an exclusive interview is my guest Michael Carpenter, Senior Fellow for Transatlantic Affairs from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, but also former United States Ambassador to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in the Biden administration. Sir, thank you so much for joining me on the program.
My pleasure.
So today's meeting in Geneva has come to an end. We have more coming. Whichever expert I ask, and I asked about the meetings taking place before, I hear the same thing. Russia is playing for time. It's not willing to actually reach a ceasefire. Do you still have hope left after all these meetings that we've seen around a potential ceasefire, potential peace between Ukraine and Russia? Or Russia is truly simply playing for time, and when it comes to these very meetings, major breakthrough is not going to be reached?
Well, I tend to agree with most of the experts that you just cited. I unfortunately don't think that there's going to be a breakthrough anytime soon, because Russia's position and Ukraine's position are so diametrically opposed. In my view, Vladimir Putin is still intent on subjugating and controlling all of Ukraine. And anything less than that, really, in the eyes of his Kremlin colleagues and the Russian people, would be a strategic defeat. So I don't think that after 4 years and 1.3 million casualties, that Vladimir Putin is somehow going to choose something that is less than his full aim of subjugating Ukraine. And similarly, Ukraine is not going to agree to giving away the parts of the Donbass that it has valiantly fought to defend over these last 4 years. And so, try as they might, I don't think U.S. negotiators are going to be able to bridge this critical difference, which means that likely this sort of kabuki negotiation process is going to go on for many more months.
Mm-hmm. But considering your particular vantage point, what do you think the solution should be to end this conflict, or at least definitely bring it closer to an end?
Well, I think if you wanted to end this conflict on terms that are just and sustainable, then the number one thing that the United States ought to be doing, together with its Western allies, is putting pressure on Russia. The Trump administration has not done that since day one. They've put zero tariffs on Russia. Vladimir Putin was given red carpet treatment in Alaska. There have been only minor sanctions put on 2 Russian energy firms. A lot more could have been done to build on what was done during the previous administration, but none of that has happened. And so if you're not going to leverage Russia, which has a very weak economy and whose society is already showing signs of stress as a result of the tremendous cost of this war, if you're not going to do that, then you're not going to arrive at a solution where Ukraine is able to sustain its sovereignty and independence. And so then, what sort of solution are we really talking about? It's not really one that's worth having. And the Ukrainians are going to just defend themselves regardless, and they're going to try to protect their interests. So I think the administration has gone about this the entirely wrong way, and I don't think they show any signs of wanting to leverage Moscow, for the simple reason that I think the Trump administration ultimately just wants to reset relations with Russia. And if that's their aim, then I also think that they're not going to be able to achieve it because the war will drag on.
I would like us to take a step back and take a look at the Munich Security Conference that's behind us. Headlining the U.S. delegation was this year Marco Rubio and not J.D. Vance like we saw last year. And his testament, his address to the European nations was received with a certain sort of relief, let's say, some sort of a reassurance that the U.S. is in fact European ally and is going to stand side by side and have a transatlantic relationship continue. How do you read into Rubio's message? Was it the case of a good cop, bad cop when we compare the two addresses during the Munich Security Conference from last year and this year? Or the substance remains the same? What do you think?
So in my opinion, the substance remains the same. As someone noted, Rubio was essentially Diet Vance, the same thing with fewer calories. But look, in all seriousness, I think people breathed a sigh of relief in the room when Rubio finished his speech, because he didn't engage in the same sort of hectoring tone that Vice President Vance did last year. But if you look at the substance of the speech, I mean, it was truly remarkable that he went on for so many minutes talking about common civilizational values, talking about Shakespeare and the Beatles and Michelangelo, but hardly a word at all about Russia and Ukraine. I mean, think about it. 4 years into what is the largest land war in Europe since World War II, approaching 2 million casualties on both sides, and the Secretary of State of the United States is at the Munich Security Conference, and he barely says a word about Ukraine. He got asked a question about it after his speech was over by Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger, the host of the conference, but he didn't mention it, and he didn't lay out a solution to that problem in the speech. That, to me, shows the true extent of U.S. disengagement from Europe. And then last thing I'll say is he followed up the speech by traveling to Budapest and to Bratislava to embrace two nationalist populist politicians who, by the way, are also pro-Russia and tend to be fairly pro-China in their approaches to geopolitics. So that, I think, speaks more than the substance of the actual speech.
So I'm very glad you mentioned Mr. Rubio making his way to Slovakia and Hungary, because I wanted to have a word with you about it. So why do you think he chose these countries, and what message does it actually send to Europe that Mr. Rubio claimed the U.S. administration wants to have such a good relationship with?
Well, I think it's very symbolic of the administration's foreign policy, which is to embrace similar governments that espouse an ideology that is analogous to that of the MAGA movement, namely an ideology that is illiberal in its nature, that is willing to accept degradation of democratic institutions, not just at home, but also abroad. And what that means is both Slovakia and Hungary, as I mentioned, are countries that have been accommodating or seeking rapprochement, if you will, with both Moscow and Beijing. And the United States is in the midst of doing exactly the same thing. We are slowly undermining the checks and balances which have made our democracy viable for so many centuries. But we are also at the same time embracing Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin, and to a lesser extent, Xi Jinping in Beijing. And I think this point is very important, because a lot of people assumed this administration was going to come into office and have a very confrontational, great power competition style of diplomacy. But in fact, it has been anything but that. It has been accommodation and appeasement of our two biggest rivals, Russia and China.
Rubio also voiced upon his visit to Budapest endorsement of Viktor Orban, the current prime minister, ahead of the parliamentary elections, which are set to take place in April. In your opinion, do you think that this is going to help Orban, especially considering that his opposition, TISA, is leading in the polls?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm not enough of an expert on Hungarian politics. I suspect that for some of the Fidesz base, who have supported Viktor Orban through thick and thin over the years and essentially turned a blind eye to some of the unsavory dealings of crony capitalism that have emerged, especially over the course of these last 5 or 6 years. I think for them, this is probably an endorsement that is good, that is positive, that counts. But generally speaking, given the momentum behind Peter Magyar and the opposition movement, I think this will be seen as perhaps a kiss of death from a leader in a country that has essentially said that he's going to undermine European democracies, or cultivate resistance is the term that's used in the national security strategy, to mainstream European parties and European political culture.
Just before we go, I wanted to ask your opinion about a recent statement by Polish President Karol Nawrocki, who in one of his media addresses, he said that Poland should consider creating its own nuclear deterrent, and that's a conversation that Europe is having altogether. Do you think this is possibly a sign that even leaders who are closer to President Trump don't believe the U.S. would actually stand up for the allied countries in case such need arrived?
Look, I don't think it's a matter of political ideology. I think a lot of European leaders, and in fact leaders in the Asia Pacific as well, have taken away from the Greenland crisis and from various other statements from President Trump that they cannot fully count on American extended deterrence. And it is questionable whether the United States, for the first time in a long time, it's questionable whether the United States would defend one of its allies in an Article 5-like scenario, or perhaps suggest that there be some diplomatic resolution to a conventional military conflict involving an ally. And so in that situation, and particularly given everything that's happened in the aftermath of the Budapest Memorandum with Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, a lot of countries are now looking at whether to develop a nuclear program. A lot of middle powers, both U.S. allies and non-U.S. allies, and that extends to the Middle East, extends to Europe, extends to the Asia Pacific. So I'm not surprised. I think this is strategic hedging. I think it is something that you're going to see more and more of in the coming years as countries ultimately conclude that if they can't count on the United States, they're going to have to develop that deterrent potential themselves.
Definitely a discussion that is going to be continued. Michael Carpenter, Senior Fellow for Transatlantic Affairs from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, was my guest. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
And so this would be all the latest news for now. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Thank you for joining me on the program, and I hope to see you back here tuning in on TVP World for more.